Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Jay Thorn. Hi Jay.
Hi, Joanna.
Jay is a horror and dark fantasy author, a podcaster, and an entrepreneur. And I'm really excited to have a chat to Jay because he's pretty famous in the world of indies and is speaking at the Jim Kukroll's Author Marketing Club Live, which is very exciting. So Jay, I wanted to start by asking, what is your appraisal of the current horror market for indies? Because to me, it seems like, personally, as someone who reads horror, it seems like it's having a renaissance. But what do you think? What is your view of horror?
Well, this is probably not going to come off as a very educated response, but I honestly don't pay much attention to it. And the reason I don't is because it just happens to be how bookstores categorize what I write. And so I have to call it that because people say, what do you write? Well, okay, I write horror and dark fantasy, but I would write these stories whether that label existed or not, whether that genre was popular or not. And if I was in this for money, I would be writing like paranormal, vampire, werewolf romance right now. But that's not. I'm not doing this for money.
Me too.
So honestly, like I don't spend too much time like analyzing the genre. I basically just write what I write. I kind of keep my head down, and I figure like with a global audience these days, you don't necessarily have to write in a hot genre to sell. I think you just write to that reader, and they'll find you.
I guess I'm asking more. It's a personal question, because I struggle with, like if something has a demon in it, does that make it horror, or does that, what does that make it? And I feel like my own books sit on the edge, and I notice that yours do as well, and so it's a kind of a struggle for me. What do you think of that question? If there's a demon in it, is it horror?
It can be. How's that for a non-committal answer? Yeah, I know. Like I read Desecration, and I think I told you I think you could market that as horror if you wanted, but you could also market it as a suspenseful, occult thriller. Like there are a number of ways that book could be marketed. So I guess it's really up to the author to call it, claim that tag or not.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing, the whole genre question. You mentioned there, if I was writing for money, I would write, the vampire stuff. And of course, I tried to write a mainstream crime novel, which turned into Desecration, which just isn't mainstream at all. But you also claim that you claim the word entrepreneur for yourself, which I think is brilliant. And I'm trying to get everyone, all authors, to claim the word entrepreneur. What makes you comfortable with that word?
For me, being an entrepreneur means taking risks and trying things, but also letting go of things very quickly that don't pan out. To me, that's sort of the essence of an entrepreneur. So you have this idea of, iterations and making pivots. Those are sort of some popular terms in entrepreneurship right now. And I think they definitely apply to authors that claim to be entrepreneurs. So I'll give you an example. You were part of, or I think we had talked about the premiumboxsets.com idea I had about marketing multi-author box sets, and I tried it, and it didn't work, and so I quit. I think you kind of have to divorce your ego from it a lot of times, and so for me, I'll find myself getting involved in things that I don't know how to do or aren't fully fleshed out, and then I go and do it. And I think that's sort of the risk-taking part. And it's not for everyone, I recognize that. But for me, someone has an idea, I'll say yes, and then I'll go and try and figure out how to execute it.
And I think that idea, that kind of, I'm just going to go try it, that to me is the only way to be an indie. Because none of us know what we're doing, right? We just try stuff. But on that, what have you seen over the last few years? Like, what have you learned? What are the big lessons that you've learned out of being an indie?
The two big lessons, and this is really a little bit of a preview of what I'm going to say at Author Marketing Live next week. There are two really takeaways for me at this point in my career. The first one is you have to take risks. And most of them you're going to fail most of the time, and so you just have to acknowledge that 9 out of 10 things you try are going to be miserable failures. The second thing that I realized, and as an introvert, this has really sort of challenged my core belief system, is you have to give. You have to go out and give of yourself, and you have to do it in a way where you're not expecting a return. So it's not a barter. It's giving because you believe in what someone's doing. And those are really the two things I think have sort of transformed the way I've approached my writing and my business.
Wow, it's great to hear you say that, because that's always been my attitude, is that, I call it social karma.
Mm-hmm.
You never know when it's going to come back, but it will probably come back at some point.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Well, that's interesting. You talk there about divorcing your ego, and you've just put out this new book, The Black Fang Betrayal. Mm-hmm. Now, it's collaborative with 10 authors, right? Now, that's from correct. What I've heard about collaborative work, divorcing your ego is incredibly important. Tell us how you managed to wrangle 10 authors together and why you did this project.
Well, it was an impulsive idea. I'm very impulsive. I just do things, and I had this idea: why not get 10 authors together and write a story? And that was it. Then I was off, and I was doing it, and I never thought if it would work or not. I just started, and I'm going to write a pretty detailed blog post, because what I've discovered in this project is it's more about project management and dealing with people than it is about writing. It's the writing part's the easy part. It's the management piece that was really interesting, and I learned a ton from it. And it was a very positive experience. Like I don't have any backroom horror stories about this project. I mean, there were 2 authors along the way that had to bow out for personal reasons and legitimate reasons, and 2 authors that jumped on late, and yet here we are a year later, and it's out. So. I think that the management piece is really tricky. You have to know when to lead and sort of impose your vision, and then you also have to subdue the ego at times and solicit feedback, and that's a real fine line to walk.
And actually, quite a lot of the indie author life is that organization and management, isn't it?
Well, yeah, because no one else is going to do it for you, and I wouldn't want anyone else doing it for me. I have friends that are hybrids, friends that are traditionally published, friends that are used to be and are now independent. And I honestly, I'm not putting down any other person's choice of career path, but for me, I have no interest in working with any publisher or any agent, because I feel like I don't want to sacrifice my own vision of what I want to do. And for some people, they really need that, and more power to them, but it's not the path I want to take.
No, me neither. I did a German deal recently, and I thought, yay, that'll be great, because it's German, and But actually, I'm like, I really want to change the price. I really want to do this. I really want to do that. So I'm finding it very difficult not to have total control.
Yeah.
We're all just control freaks, aren't we?
Oh yeah, that's assumed.
But maybe we don't realize it until we start down this route, I guess.
It could be. I've heard suggestions about using virtual assistants, and that's so attractive to me. And then I think but I don't want to turn that over to someone
to someone else
that doesn't even know me. Like, how do I know they're going to do it the way I want it done? And then I think, well, if I have to prep them to that point, I might as well just do it myself.
That sounds like me 6 months ago. I'm going to encourage you on the VA side of things.
Please do, because I'm starting to get swamped in some of those tasks. So,
yeah, well, it does happen, definitely. Now, I wanted to ask you also about your website and your brand, because that's something that authors really struggle with. So you've gone for the classic black. I write dark stuff, therefore my website is black.
Yeah.
Was that just an obvious thing? How much thought did you really put into your brand and your tagline and the type of books you write? Like, are you hankering after writing some pink swirly romance?
No. I think in a way I've really worked on a lot of the details. I'm sure, as you have, I've rewritten my bio thousands of times. I've rewritten product descriptions hundreds of times. I've changed covers on certain books a number of times. However, I think my brand is authentic because it's just who I am, and so a lot of decisions were really non-decisions. Like, I've been a heavy metal fan since I was a teenager, so And I've read horror since I was a teenager. So having a website that's sort of dark and classic and black, like, that's just, of course, right? Like, what else would it be? So I think at some level, I'm pretty in tune with who I am, and it's taken me a long time to be proud of that. And I think that's sort of the journey that we're all on, is sort of coming out and saying, like, this is who I am, and I recognize it's not going to be for everyone, but if you're like this, then come along, because this is what I'm doing. And so that was the approach I took, and so it made it kind of easy in a way.
Yeah, and we've talked before about this authenticity and, you know, really sort of claiming who we are, and how I've struggled with it for a long time. And now I've got this, I'm definitely kind of schizophrenic with JF Penn and the creative Penn. But you've got this great brand, and I look at your site and I'm like, yeah, this is right, you know, so it's awesome. And I wanted to ask you also, you have this special list sign up called the Keepers, which you seem to make quite exclusive. What's the difference between that and your main list, if you have one, and what role does email marketing play in your business?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think my mailing list is pretty traditional, and that I do what a lot of authors do with it. I send maybe 2 messages a month. They're usually something interesting, something entertaining. If there's a new release, I'll let them know. I'm not selling hard to that mailing list. I'm basically just kind of reminding people I'm still around, because I'm in it for the long haul. The Keepers was an idea that came out of it was an email that Dan Blank, I think you're familiar with Dan Blank. I'm on his list, and he sent an email about it was probably a couple years ago now, but it was something about creating something a little more special, something for your true fans, your really hardcore fans. And so it is exclusive, but it's open to anyone. So there's sort of a little application form, and the way I think about it is, if you're willing to fill out the application form and tell me a little bit about yourself, then you want to be part of this. And if that alone makes it not interesting to you, then you probably don't belong in there anyways. But it's a group where I give those people access to me. So we have a private Facebook group, and I've helped a few of them. Some are aspiring writers, so they're looking for some advice. A lot of them are just readers that enjoy the interaction. I enjoy interacting with them. They've been tremendous in giving me early feedback on both ideas and drafts. And about 6 months ago, I wrote short stories that are part of the Portal Arcane trilogy box set. You can only get them in that box set, and they all feature keepers. So I got to know people, and then I asked them who wants to be in the story, and I used them as characters in the story. So, these are not highly unique or original ideas, but I think there are ways that sort of they bring people in a way that's, again, authentic and meaningful, and it's and then those people that want to sort of keep a little bit of distance, don't want to be that personally connected, then they can be on the mailing list, and that's sort of more of a one-way communication.
No, I like that you have those 2 levels. I haven't gone that second level yet, but it's definitely something I'm looking at. I've made up some names that I'm considering that I won't share now. But you've also started a podcast. Now I know how much hard work a podcast is. So what possessed you to bring in a podcast into your whole thing?
I'm insane. I don't know. Yeah, Jim Kukla and I were having lunch earlier this year, because we both live in Cleveland, and he said, "You got to do a podcast." And I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Because there's no one in that space. You've got to do a podcast for horror writers about horror." And at the time, it just sounded like, oh, another level of work. Oh. And so I started it out, and my original intention was to give aspiring writers a place to start and do it in real small chunks. So there are podcasts that are marketing based, there are podcasts that are more open ended, that are very long. I thought, okay, I'm going to give like 10 and 15 minute segments of very specific stuff. And I did 5 or 6 of those, and then I started to kind of stall, and I'm like, I don't know how much longer I can do this, how interesting it is. And Richard Brown, who writes Dead Highways, another horror writer, he kind of emailed me, and he said, I've been thinking about a podcast, and I see what you're doing here. And he was kind of being gentle with me, but what he was basically saying was like, this is going to this is going to crash soon, and I'm interested. And so I had him on as a guest in the last episode, and I think we have a really good working relationship, and he's a funny guy, and he's very insightful. And I said, you know what? Let's make a go at this. Let's make it a co-host. We're going to rebrand. So probably on September 8th will be our first new episode. So we're going video. We're going more like a talk show format as opposed to instructional. And we're going to see how it works. And we both promised each other that if it's not fun, we're going to stop doing it.
Well, again, it's about trying things out and seeing what happens. And I mean, what role do you think multimedia plays in this whole space? I mean, do you think that because, there's so much text, that's how I feel. I feel there's so much text that we can reach people through video or audio that we may not be able to reach otherwise.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think the question is, we have to be really cautious and ask ourselves from a reader perspective. I think as authors, we get really wrapped up in some of these ideas about bringing multimedia in, and we get excited about it as an author, but we then fail to consider what it looks like to a reader. So, one example of that I'm sort of on the fence on, I really don't know what the future of this is going to be, but book trailers have been something that's sort of polarized authors. So some authors really believe in them, they think they're very powerful, and other authors think they're pretty much a waste of time. And I don't know where I fall on that. Books are not movies, and a movie trailer is very different than a book trailer. And whether that translates to a reader versus a moviegoer, I think remains to be seen. So I just think if we're going to try those types of things, we just need to keep the reader in the forefront, and hopefully we'll get some data on that. But I don't tend to find too much data that supports those kinds of things one way or the other yet.
No, it's funny you mentioned book trailers. I did one a couple of years ago, decided I didn't believe in them, as you say, because people were spending like thousands of dollars on these things, and I was just like, I can't really see the point. Anyway, then recently my German publisher said the German retailers want video. They say that it sells more books if there is a video. So can you make a video for desecration? Now, but what's so fascinating with translation, I just made one in English and then translated it to Spanish, German and Italian. So 4 videos for the price of 1. So that's when doing a book trailer is a good idea, when you can reuse the same material in multiple languages. Then 4 for the price of 1, why not?
Yeah, I mean that's a really smart approach. You're not going whole hog. You're not using money that you would be spending on advertising or editing or whatever. And I think that's a really smart approach. And the other piece around book trailers is book trailers are one type of video. So podcasting is another type of video. The name is escaping me, but there was a new book that came out, and the book trailer was the author sitting in front of the screen telling the readers what the book is about. And it accomplished the same thing, but it's not a book trailer. It's basically the author speaking directly to the audience. So that kind of interests me as well, because I think it's one of the reasons why the Horror Writers podcast is moving to video is, Richard's like, wow, people need the conversation. They like to connect with the face, and that makes a difference.
I agree, which is why I do video too. And I mean, my YouTube account has taken years to build up to reasonable number, but as everything, things start to speed up. So, and I'm actually thinking next year, talking to you is really helpful. And I talked to Martin Lestraps. Do you know him? He writes horror. I talked to him and about being honest about things. And I'm really thinking that next year I'll do more video for readers, just like you say, just talking about why I'm writing certain things, and as I go through stuff, whereas I've kept all of that really secret in the past. But that little glimpse, I mean, do you do videos for your keepers or anything like that?
I've offered a few conference calls, and I've offered a few Google Hangouts for the keepers, but it's technically and logistically, it's a challenge to get more than just a handful of people together at the same time in the same place. Some people can be there, but they don't have a great internet connection, and other people don't have a phone, and someone else, it's a challenge. So I think one of my goals as well is to do more direct video. I know that I know video is really hot in the marketing world right now, but again, I'm not really concerned about the marketing world. I'm concerned about the book selling world, and that's my litmus test. It's got to sell books, not cars or potato chips. It's got to sell books. So
yeah, and we're always experimenting though, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's what we do. Now, I also, just before we finish, wanted to ask you about the Horror Writers Association. Now, a lot of people say things like, why should I bother joining an association? What good will that do me? It's going to cost me whatever it's going to cost me. What role do you think these professional organizations play?
I think they give you a built-in network of supporters and people who are doing the same thing. I applied to the Horror Writers Association the day their self-publishing referendum passed, and I applauded that organization. They weren't the first to accept self-published authors, but they're clearly at the front end of that. And I had I had no interest in joining that organization unless I was going to get in on my terms. And once I was able to get in on my terms, I said, okay, well, why not? They're not forcing me into a legacy situation. They're not not requiring I have an agent. They're basically saying, here's another way you can be part of this. It's the way I happen to be doing it. And so it was a no-brainer for me to join.
And do you go to their meetups or their conventions or anything like that?
Well, I've only been officially in now for probably less than a month, and so as I'm looking ahead, I haven't gotten to know too many people yet, but because the referendum just passed, I think at the end of July, so I'm looking into 2015 at different conventions and opportunities, and they have sort of they have a private bulletin board for members, and so I'm reading that and taking advantage of some of the database resources that they have sort of behind the password. So yeah, I think in time I'll grow into that, but I keep a pretty good perspective on it. Like I'm a member, but I didn't like sell my soul to get in there. I guess I'm happy to be in it. I'm grateful, but I'm also proud that I was able to come in my way.
Yeah, and I'm a more active member now of International Thriller Writers, ITW, and I went to Thriller Fest earlier this year, and I'm writing for the magazine. And what I really like now with these organisations opening up to indies is we can be an active part and stand next to other traditionally published authors. So I think it's really important that indies join these organisations and slowly change attitudes from the inside. So brilliant, and you'll have to let us know how Horror Writers goes.
Yes, I'll certainly will.
Over time. Okay, so where can people find you and your books and the podcast and everything online?
Easiest thing to do is just to go to jthorn.net. It's jthorn.net, and that is that's the portal to everything. So the podcast is there. All of my books are there. The podcast, the direct URL is thehorrorwriterspodcast.com. So if you want to just check out the podcast, that's the direct link.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, Jay.
Thanks for having me, Joanna.